Welcome back, guys, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Chris Hearn. I'm the West Tennessee field rep for Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Born and raised here in West Tennessee, and I've hunted turkeys in Tennessee and other parts of the country for going on 20 years now. I've really enjoyed sharing my experience with you guys through these virtual classes. And then also tonight, we got Adam Nelson, a good friend of mine and Hunting and Fishing Academy volunteer. Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate you asking me to be on. I'm Adam Nelson. I'm from Milan, Tennessee. I've lived in West Tennessee all my life as well. I killed my first turkey in 2003 and have been fairly well addicted to it ever since. Met Chris in college and found that he was also so afflicted. So we've become pretty good friends. We've hunted turkeys different places and had some really good times together. And we talk to each other pretty regular, but especially during turkey season, it's an everyday thing. And so I hope you don't think I'm a subject matter expert on turkeys, and certainly not killing turkeys, but I do love to talk about turkeys, and I love to hunt them more than just about anything else in the world. And so I'm happy that you asked me to join y'all for this, and happy to be a part of it.
Good deal. Thanks. Taylor, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the Zoom functions and the way tonight's class is going to work?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Like Chris mentioned, I'm Taylor Martin. I'm the manager for the Hunting and Fishing Academy for the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I'm also from West Tennessee. I live outside Nashville these days. I'm pretty new to the turkey hunting, so it's going to be Chris and Adam that handle most of this. But tonight I'm kind of working in the IT department. So we're using Zoom tonight. You'll notice your cameras and mics are muted, so we can't see or hear you guys. But this is a question and answer webinar, so we're here to answer your questions that you have. So the best way to ask us your questions is to put them in the Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen. You'll hit that and be able to type us and send us your questions, and Adam and Chris will answer those as soon as they can. And then we also have the chat function. So if you have just anything you want to say that's not necessarily a question, you can put it in that chat function. And then here in a little bit, we're actually going to have a poll question that pops up as well, just to get an idea of y'all have been out in the field or not yet this season. But other than that, I'll hand it back over to you, Chris.
Thanks. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, what it is we do. The Tennessee Wildlife Federation was founded in 1946, and it's one of the largest and oldest conservation nonprofits in the state. And we're dedicated to the conservation, the sound management, and the wise use of Tennessee's great outdoors. The Federation brings together and represents the various interests of hunters, anglers, wildlife watchers, and other outdoors enthusiasts. Common sense conservation policy is at the heart of the Federation, and we represent these various stakeholders on Capitol Hill. Through its habitat conservation program, the Federation is restoring and conserving thousands of acres of wildlife habitat, and there's lots of ways that you could get involved, and you can find out more at tnwf.org/get involved. Outside of our policy and conservation work, we also have several other programs. The Scholastic Clay Target Program is offered to kids from ages 9 through college, and the kids have the option to shoot in multiple shooting disciplines in the shotgun shooting sports. And currently there's about 1,700 kids across the state shooting in SCTP. A lot of you guys have probably heard of Hunters for the Hungry. The Hunters for the Hungry program feeds Tennesseans by providing venison to hunger relief organizations, and these deer are donated by deer hunters across the state. Since 1998, there's been about 7.6 million servings provided by Hunters for the Hungry. And then that brings us to the Hunting and Fishing Academy. That's where I spend most of my time, and Taylor's manager of Hunting and Fishing Academy. If you look at the model for the North American Conservation Model, you'll see that it's a user-funded model, meaning that conservation dollars are generated through license sales and the taxes on ammo and other outdoors equipment. For about 20 years, we've been experiencing a decline in the participation in hunting and fishing. And as you could imagine, this throws an alarm up to make sure that we got conservation dollars for the future. We just need to keep the hunting and fishing sport strong. So that's why programs like Hunting and Fishing Academy was created. We mimic that generational transfer of knowledge through our mentored hunting experiences. And then we also try to concentrate on the public land portion of it, just because we know that's a barrier for people getting started. And then also the field to table concept. So the complete process from hunting all the way to preparing it on your table there. So a little overview of what we got tonight. Got a couple of slides to talk about the harvest to date, to this point in the season. Last year compared to this year, we got the 15-year harvest by region and kind of the way things are trending. And then since it will be opening this weekend, some of our delayed opening counties and WMAs, I'll be going over that, and then we'll open up for questions for me and Adam to answer anything you guys have got. So next, the survey that Taylor was talking about, just trying to get a feel for you, how much experience y'all got as far as getting out and hunting this season. If you could take just a second, answer, have you been out turkey hunting this season? All right, thanks, guys. So if you want to look at, this is the 2021 harvest data as of today. This is including the juvenile and then what's been left of the regular season so far. And you can see that we're right at 19,000 harvested, 20,000 harvested. And you can see on this chart what your most productive counties are. So right there in Region 2, Davidson County, the area around Nashville, some of the most productive counties in the state. You got Greene County over on the east tip that's killing, between 600 and 800 so far. And then we'll compare that to the 2020. We're, like I said, about 12% down at the season to date, but obviously COVID happening last year, more people off work and working from home and able to get outdoors. So hunter effort was probably up. That's not to say that it's not a little bit tougher hunting this year and possibly even a little bit difference in population and the abundance of turkeys, but that's kind of where we're at compared to year to date. Adam, do you want to go over our 15-year harvest by region and kind of what you see when you look at that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And just to start with, I hunt primarily in Region 1. Like I said, I've lived in West Tennessee and I've hunted other areas of the state, but by a substantial margin, most of my time spent in Region 1 in several counties in West Tennessee. And generally the population has sort of trended, not just in Tennessee, but across the Southeast, has trended downward over the last several years. And there's a lot of research and a lot of money being spent trying to figure out the cause of all that. But the harvest has sort of done the same thing, and they're certainly related. Region 2 is by a huge margin the most productive in our state, which is, the western side of Middle Tennessee, around the Tennessee River, Murray County, and everything sort of north and south of that. And that's still true today, but their harvest has trended downward over the last 15 years, just like Region 1's has. In 2006, between 2006 and 2010, I think is when most people will tell you was the peak of the turkey population boom in Tennessee and in a lot of different places. The turkeys were reestablished. In the 70s through the 80s, by the 1990s, they were pretty well established, and then the populations really expanded and did great. And they're still good in a lot of areas, but they're not doing as well as we would hope for them to do a lot of times. And so, as you would expect, the harvest results are a lot of times going to track your population trends. So if you've got some fewer turkeys around, there's going to be fewer turkeys harvested. That's not always true, because we've also got a lot more people participating in turkey hunting now than what we used to. But even with the greater participation and sort of greater technology and the greater techniques that everybody uses, at least in region 1 and region 2, the harvest rates have been on a slow but noticeable decline since the mid 2000s. Region 3 and region 4 have not seen that quite as much. And I don't know exactly how to explain all of that, because some of the population studies, especially in region 4, are not doing as well, even though their harvest has increased. I think part of it is that they were sort of the lowest population wise and the lowest harvest wise to begin with. And so they can still be expanding populations, even though they're not growing in other parts of the state as much as they want to. But certainly it's good to see that in region 3 and region 4, they're killing a few more turkeys every year. And on average, they have been for the last several years. Hopefully, as long as the increased harvest tracks an increase in turkey numbers, that's great news for everybody. And hopefully we can sort of steady out region 1 and region 2. The state Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, they've spent a lot of money with the University of Tennessee. There's a lot of research and a lot of efforts being put into making sure that we've got a good population to hunt for future generations. Right now, it's not where we want it to be everywhere, but it's not terrible yet anywhere. I've been able to find some turkeys even in region 1 with the populations and the harvest rates going down. There's still things will stay good for a while to come.
All right, thanks, Adam. So I'm going to go on in. So kind of to build on that, if you look at region 1, kind of being less productive as far as their reproductive success, we do have some delayed season openings that'll be taking place and opening up Saturday, the 17th. Region 1 WMAs, I believe all of those were on a delay. Some of the state parks and different things were open, but I believe all the actual wildlife management areas were on a delay. And then also newly created was the Mississippi Alluvial Valley Unit, which is Dyer Lake, Lauderdale, Shelby, and Tipton counties. They're on a delayed opening. And then also in South Central counties, the Giles, Lawrence, Lincoln, and Wayne counties will also be opening up the 17th. And kind of like what Adam had said, we're dealing with some decreasing populations, and we've also got that UT study going on the South Central counties. But what it is data shows that early male mortality can affect reproductive success. So if the gobblers that's breeding the hens are getting killed or even hunted and pressured, it can negatively affect how many hens are being bred. So that's the reasoning for these delayed openings. And that's pretty much it on that. And then we're going to open it up to questions. I know we've already got a couple that have been submitted beforehand, and then we got one here. Taylor, you want to read us the questions?
Yeah, that's no problem. We'll get to Christopher's question first. And he asked, do turkeys tend to roost or prefer to roost on south-facing slopes, the warmer slopes, as he puts it?
Go ahead, Adam.
In my experience, not substantially. And I'll say this, I have heard that is a somewhat common thing in some of the western states where turkeys in the spring are having to deal with really harsh winters and really harsh conditions. Most of what I hunt is fairly flat ground, so you would struggle to find a true slope in some of the places and counties that I hunt. But even when I have hunted in Middle Tennessee or in Nebraska, in some areas where there is some more substantial terrain features, particularly in the spring, the weather is just not severe enough to require turkeys to do that. Not saying that they never will, but particularly if you think about it through the night, the south side's not going to be any warmer than the north side. During the day, in the middle of the day, the sun's going to get up in warm south-facing slopes. So it's definitely a thing with deer and elk. Chris has hunted out west a lot more than I have, so it's a thing with them. But turkeys are going to fly down at daybreak regardless. Now, certainly in some cold areas, turkeys may tend to, favor sunny areas in the middle of the day to warm up, or when it gets hot in the summer, they'll certainly try to find shaded spots to strut and hang out in during the day. But as far as the roost location, where I hunt, in the river bottoms, it's typically they try to roost over some kind of water feature, an oxbow or something that gives them some protection from predators from below. And then in ag field areas, it mostly is just determined by, where the tree line and the timbers are, where the corners of the fields are, where there's coves where they can sort of feel protected. And I think there's also some pretty compelling research to show that they pick spots where they know that they can be heard for a while. So sometimes they're in elevated locations. They do that instinctively because they know that hens can then hear them gobbling better in the morning, because that's sort of the key method that they use to attract hens for mating. So to answer the question, I don't think that's it's not something that I've seen in West Tennessee. It may happen some in other areas, but I think it's more other factors that influence where they choose to roost.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with everything Adam said. I don't think you're going to see a big difference in Tennessee as far as especially roost locations. One thing I will mention that's on the same kind of ideology of why one would prefer south or north facing slopes, as you get up into later season, I seen this happen a couple of weeks ago. There was some birds went into a north facing slope midday, and there was a big shadow cast across that thing, and it done got up in the mid 80s. And I think there might be a little bit of some logic in the fact that those birds might go, as the season goes on, it gets warmer, to get in the shadow side, which would be the north side of slopes generally. But as far as the roosting, I'm like Adam, I don't think there's going to be any kind of influence in Tennessee.
All right, good deal. So this is a question someone submitted beforehand. It's kind of a two-part question. It says, should I use a decoy when I'm going out? And if I do, should that be a hen, gobbler, or a Jake decoy?
Go ahead, Adam.
I think to start with, there's different styles of turkey hunting. It's one of the things that makes it so great. I had an uncle that passed last year, but he's one of the guys that took me on my first turkey hunts. And he had the patience of a clam, and he could go into a spot where he knew turkeys were going to be, and he would wait, and he would call a little bit, and he would kill one, and he would kill a lot like that. There's certainly situations where a decoy is going to help you kill turkeys, particularly when you're hunting field turkeys, and turkeys that are just in more open areas. Early in the year, decoys are, I think, going to be more productive than they are later in the year, because early in the year, they're still sort of in the process of breaking out from their bigger winter flocks, and they break into smaller subgroups, so sort of through the spring. So early in the year, they're still sort of trying to establish social hierarchy and dominance among other males. And not only that, there's just less vegetation on the trees, so they can see a decoy a lot further. And it's just a different style, and people have different preferences. I personally don't use decoys. It changes the experience a little bit, and some people love it. Some people, because if you have a decoy and a turkey comes to the decoy, odds are you're going to have a little bit longer and oftentimes closer interaction with the turkey if he comes all the way into the decoy. I typically try to hunt in the timber. I'll hunt the fields when I have to, when turkeys won't cooperate with me. But I would rather try to find one that's gobbling and receptive and that will come to a call. But the reality of that is when they come to a call, they're going to get to a certain point where they know they should be able to see a hen. And so when they get there, you may only have a few seconds or a minute or two when you have an opportunity to shoot them. I like that style. It's just, it's different, and it's my preference. Turkey decoys change the game a little bit, and not necessarily in a bad way. Some people prefer it. If your primary goal, if you're newer to turkey hunting and you really want to kill a turkey, I think decoys, especially early in the year, are good to do that with. As to which you should use, it is incredibly situation dependent, and it's hard to give a specific answer. Chris hunts some more open areas and he uses decoys a little bit more than I do, with some tremendous success, and he can probably tell you a little bit more about it than I can. But I can tell you, if you can figure out some details about the turkeys you're hunting, it'll help you a lot. So if you're hunting in a field and there's been 3 gobblers that are staying in a group together with a bunch of hens, Odds are, if you put a male decoy, an aggressive looking Jake decoy, or even a strutter decoy out, those 3 gobblers that are in a pack together are going to feel bold and dominant enough to come over and make sure that that doesn't happen. If you're hunting a single gobbler that has a few hens, he may be a satellite gobbler that's already sort of gotten beaten out of another flock somewhere else, and he may not want anything to do with another male decoy. And in that case, a hen decoy may be better. Definitely when they work, the gobbler decoys and the Jake decoys work faster. When a turkey flies down to a field and it happens where he's going to come try to run off this other turkey, it can be a all out sprint, and you can find a million different videos on the internet. With a hen decoy, they may come to a hen decoy, but it may be something where they could pitch down to a field and just spend half the morning drift in that direction because they're not in a huge rush. They can see the hen, they know she's there, and they may stay in a spot and strut and gobble for a little bit. And so, if your question is, should I use decoys? It's a personal choice that you have to make. I think they can definitely help people that are new to the sport sort of get familiar with their settings. I would just encourage you to realize that there's a different way to do it that some people like. And if it gets to a point where you want to try a different style, I think there's very few things in the world more exciting than having a turkey coming to you that doesn't see you yet, that's gobbling and trying to find you, and you know that he's going to show up in a minute. And that is kind of a no decoy experience. So I hope you try both ways, and I hope you kill turkey whichever way you prefer, but they can certainly help in the right situation.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that. The only thing that I would add, just to build on what Adam said, is when you're starting out, and there is so many things that turkeys do when they're coming to a call, as far as circling you and coming in behind you and different things. I think as far as that learning curve and being able to get good shooting opportunities, getting a decoy out there that'll take the attention away from you and draw them basically down your barrel if you're set up, can be a benefit. And then after you kind of get a couple under your belt, then you can start getting away from that. But I'm like Adam, I very rarely use decoys, but they are, when you're hunting fields and you kind of know where turkeys are going to be. Plus, if you're going to be kind of patient, like you were saying, if I'm going to set up in one spot, spend a lot of time there, I'm probably going to pack my decoys in.
And just to add one more thing to that too, you have to think about the time of the year. And so I sort of explained early in the year when these turkeys are still breaking out into subflocks, turkey decoys can be great for a couple of different reasons, but we hadn't really talked about it yet. But with turkeys in the spring, obviously they're in their breeding season. And part of that is the hens, as they breed with gobblers, they go off and start initiating a nest. And the closer they get to finishing off their nest, once the hen lays the last egg she's going to lay, she starts incubation. So she'll sit on the nest 20 or 23 hours a day until those eggs hatch. And so over the course, and that happens in Tennessee on average between the second week of April and the first week of May. When that happens and you all of a sudden have, an entire statewide population of hens that a week ago were receptive to breeding, and now all of a sudden half of them are starting to sit on nests, and then the next day there's a few more that are starting to sit on nests, the gobblers will suddenly realize that there's fewer and fewer hens around. And in that case, they often sort of get less inclined to go fight other turkeys, and a lot of times they'll be lonely and they'll be looking for a hen. And that's really starting right now. This time of year is when calling turkeys, you've got more vegetation to hide you when you're moving, and to sort of help the turkey have to get in close before he can find you. But if you're going to try calling a turkey, about right now is the time to start. But for decoys early in the season, definitely can be effective. So.
All right. Our next question is about hens, and specifically they're asking what should they do if they're trying to call the time in, but they have other hens calling at the same time, and the gobbler is kind of caught in between them.
Well, this is a scenario it seems like I've been running into a lot lately, and just like Adam said earlier, everybody kind of has their own little ways of doing things. And I tend to fall into a real aggressive stance whenever that happens. If I hear a hen yelping, tree yelping alongside that gobbler, or if I hear hens around that gobbler at all, I pretty much immediately change from calling to that gobbler to calling to the hens. And I want to try to get them hens riled up. The harder they call, the harder I'm going to call. And if I know if I can ever get one to come, there's a good chance that that gobbler will follow. So that's kind of my method when I'm dealing with henned up turkeys.
If you or anybody else ever figures out a method that has a greater than 50% success rate on calling in a turkey that's also being called to and interacted with live hens, you're going to make a fortune when you sell your knowledge on that, because it's just not, it's a thing that happens to everybody that turkey hunts more than a couple times in their life. It's just the reality of it. Those hens are in a process where they've got a biological instinct they need to breed. They can walk right up to a gobbler and don't have to hide or do anything else. The entire system is built around a gobbler with an elaborate display and a loud gobble that attracts hens. And so if you have a gobbler that is doing that and a hen is going to him, that's exactly the way the system is, quote unquote, supposed to work. And in my experience, a gobbler just does not leave a group of live hens to go to a turkey call. Now, they'll leave flocks of hens to go to, other decoys and for some other reasons on occasion. But I don't think I have ever successfully called a gobbler away from a flock of live hens that were still sort of receptive. So I've absolutely done what Chris just described. I've done it 100 times, and it's probably worked 2 or 3, which I think is a pretty good success rate given the situation that you're in. But for me, if I call and try to get aggressive and the hen doesn't want to play that and doesn't, just as often as anything else, those hens are going to drift and go the other way because they don't want the competition of another hen coming in. Sometimes they'll get mad, they'll get aggressive and come to you, and they can bring a gobbler with them. But the best strategy, I think, or at least the most successful, I'm not saying don't try those things, because what else are you going to do if you don't have another turkey gobbler? But the most successful thing for me is when that doesn't work, and it usually doesn't when there's hens around, is just to wait. And if it's a weekend where I don't have anything that I have to do, I will, I have friends, including Chris, that have made fun of me, but I will just intentionally find a comfortable spot and take a nap from about 8 in the morning when all this is happening until about 9 or 10 in the morning. Because a lot of times those hens, they come in and they breed, and it doesn't take them very long if there's just 3 or 4 hens and the gobbler is, inclined and they're inclined, that he can breed all of those hens pretty quick. And then once they get bred, they typically will drift off because they're still sort of staking out nesting habitat and stuff. So a turkey that is completely henned up and impossible to call at 8 o'clock in the morning might be really, really receptive at 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you've got the time and you can stay in the area, now he'll probably go quiet at some point during that time frame. But at some point in the middle of the day, there's a good chance that all of a sudden those hens are going to be gone, and he might start gobbling on his own, just trying to find a hen. There's been a lot of research that shows that they remember where they heard that hen that you calling earlier in the day. They've done studies where they had gobblers and hunters on the same sections of WNAs with GPSs. And they say time and time again, there's situations where there's a hunter set up at one point, a turkey's 200 yards away. The hunter leaves, and 3 hours later, the turkey's standing right next to the tree that he was calling from. So they don't leave. Typically they can, but if you can stay with them and wait, a lot of time your situation and your eyes are just going to get a lot better in the middle of the day if they're insurmountable in the morning.
I think that's good advice.
I do too. This one is kind of directed towards both of you. Speaking for yourselves, what's the one factor that's led you to harvest more gobblers than any other?
I think that through experience, location setup, and the time you spend to pick, I kind of would break it down into macro setup, micro setup. So I'm going to pick an area, how I'm going to set up on a gobbling turkey. And then when I say micro, I mean down to the tree that I'm going to get against, how I'm going to hide, if I'm going to take the time to shear off some stuff and get in front of me. And I think that experience and normally failures is what's going to teach you that. But I think location in which you make those first calls from probably has increased my skill set more than anything else. I see it come into play over and over, and I still make mistakes. I still set up wrong and have birds circle me or don't come like I think, and I don't get a shot opportunity. But that's all just stuff that it's really hard to teach. You just have to go out there and try to get close and try to be on equal terrain with them when you're setting up. And then through experience, you'll see what works and what don't.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And especially like we're talking about, and it's important with decoys too, regardless of how you're hunting, the spot that you sit down is it's hard to overstate how important that is. It's maybe a little more important when you're calling a turkey, because if you set up in a spot and you're trying to call a turkey to you, and that turkey is going to come into sight 100 yards from where you're sitting and calling, you're not going to kill very many turkeys, because when he gets to 100 yards and he can look across the spot and say that hen's calling from right there and I don't see it, he's not typically going to keep walking another 40 or 60 yards to get in range. So you've got to be really conscious of where you sit down to make sure that there's some kind of terrain or brush or some other feature where when the turkey gets to where he can see you, you can shoot him, because otherwise you're just going to deal with a lot of quote hung up turkeys that stop at 60 and 70 yards and won't come the rest of the way. It happens. I've had it happen to me 4 or 5 times already this year, and I know to try to set up different, but it's more prevalent early in the year when there's not as much vegetation and stuff to hide behind. But if you can make it to where when you see the turkey, you can shoot him, then that's going to help you a lot. But probably the one thing that has helped me kill more turkeys than anything, I remember really well when and I had some people that helped me along the way. I wasn't completely self-taught or anything. I had uncles and friends and neighbors that took me when I was 14, 15 years old. But they weren't, all season, that none of them hunt as turkeys as much then as I do now. And so I found myself, going at it alone a lot and sort of figuring out things along the way. And I can remember really, really well hunting and having turkeys that would fly down off of the roost, and they would gobble a lot, and I could try to get set up within 100 150 yards. They fly down and they get quiet, and I didn't know what to do. I figured, well, they're done gobbling, it's over for the day, and I would leave. A lot of my hunts were from daybreak to whatever time the turkeys quit gobbling when they flew down. And I haven't gone back. I could go back and figure out the percentages, but I can promise that a majority of the turkeys that I've killed in my life have come after 9 o'clock in the morning. And when I figured out that if you stay and you're not going to hear as much gobbling between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock as you do from daybreak till 8 o'clock, but the ones that gobble are a lot easier to deal with, because, on some mornings, every turkey in the woods is going to gobble on the roost. But when they fly down and they start doing their thing during the day, most of them aren't going to gobble during the day. But if you get one that starts gobbling at 8:30 or 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, there's a reason that he's gobbling. And typically it's because he's losing hens, or he's lost his hens, or he's got separated from his hens. And those are the turkeys that you can kill at a lot higher success rate than you can all the other ones. And so when I got comfortable with the idea that just because a turkey's not gobbling doesn't mean that I can't still be out here hunting him. And you'll kill some without them gobbling at all if you're patient enough, which I'm usually not. But if you're out there and you're hunting them this time of year and you're in areas where turkeys are, at some point, one of them's going to gobble where you can hear him. And if you can go get set up on one that's gobbling in the middle of the day, your odds of killing him are a whole lot better than they are any turkey you set up on the roost at fly down time. And so, I guess that's some form of patience. But again, a lot of times I spend some of that time napping. But just being out there and realizing that you can kill them even if they're not gobbling all through the morning. If you just wait until you find the right turkey in the right mood. And you only have to do it 2-3 times a year, and you can fill all your tags. So you'll have a lot of mornings where it doesn't work out. But if you do it enough, I promise, a few times a year, it will work out, and it's fun when it does. So.
Good deal. This next one should be a little easier to answer. What do you use to locate gobblers?
Well, through some of our other virtual classes, we've talked a lot about locator calls and kind of what makes turkeys gobble as far as what they call a shot gobble. Um, Especially hunting public land though, I'm not a big crow caller or an owler. I might owl if it's super early in the morning, but before a turkey is really supposed to gobble, just to try to get an advantage to be able to move in close before daylight. But to answer that question, I spend a lot of time, just like Adam's talking about that later morning hunt, just cutting real hard. I've got a real aggressive cut mouth call that I use, and sometimes it takes 30 or 40 stops and listening and cutting. But that's pretty much what I use to what they would call strike a turkey. In other words, make a turkey gobble on up in the morning. So that's kind of my method of finding them, especially after roost time.
And I'm generally the same as far as when I am just doing a locator type call. 99% of the time, it's an owl call, and I do it with my voice. And Chris makes fun of me because he says it actually sounds more like a hybrid between a coyote and an owl, and he's probably right. It doesn't sound much like an owl, but I have had, it's loud enough. I've had some success getting the turkey to gobble at it. But typically, I do that. If at all possible, I want a turkey to gobble on his own, just because I'd rather not make my presence known, even if I'm making it known as an owl or something else. Because some of the turkeys, especially if you're hunting on public land, they've heard a lot of other people owl at them, and some of them just get nervous at nothing. And so if I can get a turkey to gobble on his own and I don't have to make a noise, and then I can move in like that, that's my preference. But in the morning, if it's if it's getting daylight and they still hadn't gobbled, and I want to find one on the roost so I know which direction to head. Or if I'm hearing a turkey way off and I think, well, I want to make sure nothing's close before I strike out and walk a half a mile, then I'll owl and try to get one to gobble. And I do get a lot of them to gobble like that at different times. As far as after that, I'm more or less exactly like Chris said. I don't walk around, the exception being when I've hunted in Nebraska, I will do this, but in Tennessee, I don't walk around just owl calling or crow calling all through the day. I spend probably 75% of my time turkey hunting, moving. I try to move slowly so I'm not bumping turkeys, and I'll go 100 to 150 yards and I'll call, and I just sort of more of a, instead of soft yelps and Persian things, it's more of a loud, aggressive, short cuts and loud yelps. And I do that either with a mouth call that I've got that's a pretty aggressive, loud cut, or with a box call, just because those sound carries a little bit better and it's a little more sharper note, and it seems to get more turkeys to gobble. The only exception to that I think I'll mention sometimes, if I've got a turkey to gobble, or if a turkey is gobbling on his own and I'm trying to move and get into a position to finally sit down and call to that turkey, I don't want to call to that turkey until I'm in the spot that I want to be. I don't want to call at him at 150 yards and then call at him at 100 yards and then call at him at 75 yards, just because a couple different reasons. Generally, it's not a good idea. So if I've got a turkey that is gobbling sporadically and I want, I need to know, can I make it this next 50 yards? Can I make it to that next clump of trees? That is when I use a crow call. If a turkey's sort of already gobbling some and inclined to gobble anyways, and I need to do something that's not calling at him with a turkey call, but I want him to gobble, then I use a crow call. And so, I use a crow call 4 or 5 times a year on a good year most of the time. But I think that answers it.
Yeah, that definitely does. I think we got 2 more questions here, and I think that will wrap us up. This one is, what is the best shotgun and load for turkey hunting? I know there's a lot of answers to this question, but thought it was a good one that a lot of people ask.
All right, Adam, here's your chance to shine, but we want to be in bed by 9. So this is his cup of tea. So.
What is the best shotgun ever built? In my opinion, is the Remington 870. I've hunted with one for a long time. I've still got one that I hunt with sometimes. But that's sort of just a real opinion question. That's not what I duck hunt with, but it was my turkey gun for a long time. But there are a lot of really good guns out there. For eons, people have killed turkeys very, very successfully with lead shotgun shells. I shot Winchester 3-inch lead number 6s for years and years, and I killed a lot of turkeys with them. And I have no doubt that if I shot one today at a turkey that's inside of reasonable turkey range, it would still kill one. But the tungsten technology has really changed the ballistics in shotgun shells, and it's most notable in turkey hunting. So in 2013, I started hand loading my own turkey shells using tungsten or TSS, which TSS is sort of a generic name that some guy gave it a long time ago, but it's just a high grade tungsten that's 18 grams in density. And I could talk for a lot longer than y'all would want to listen about why it works and how it works. And I don't mind even doing that sometime if Chris and Taylor want to set up another podcast. But the general idea is it's so much more dense than lead or than any other available shotgun shell material that you can shoot a much, much smaller pellet and still have enough energy in that pellet to kill a turkey at a reasonable range. But because you can shoot a shotgun shell, the pellets that's so much smaller, you can fit a whole lot more of them in a shell. And so with more pellets of sufficient energy, you get more range, but range is really not what I'm after for it. Because you can fit so many more pellets in a smaller shell, it made my 20 gauge with tungsten, and it's not just a hand load operation anymore. You can buy them from a bunch of different providers now. But my 20 gauge with a tungsten load is so far superior to what my 12 gauge ever was with a lead load that it's hard to explain to people that aren't sort of into the ballistics. But with a 20 gauge, you can carry a gun that's 5 pounds or less, and you can still shoot turkeys just as far as any person should want to shoot at a turkey, just as far as anybody ever should have been shooting at them with a 12 gauge. And you're 2 or 3 pounds in weight doesn't sound like much of a difference. And I guess depending on your style of hunting, it may not be, but the way I hunt, I know the way Chris hunts, I walk a lot of miles during a turkey season, and I've noticed an extraordinary difference just in how much nicer it is carrying a lightweight 20 gauge gun, especially when you're not giving up any range or any effectiveness or anything else. So if you're new to turkey hunting and you're trying to get into it and you're not wanting to spend a bunch of money, because tungsten is expensive, whether you buy it commercially or hand load your shells, it is absolutely not necessary to kill turkeys. But if you're sort of addicted to turkey, once you get addicted to turkey hunting and you want other things to waste your time that are turkey hunting related, it's a great hobby to have. But if you're getting into turkey hunting and you just want a basic gun that's is going to shoot and it's going to do good to killing the turkeys, I wouldn't have any hesitation shooting a 12 gauge 870 with a fairly generic rim choke, turkey choke constriction, and 3-inch or 3.5-inch Winchester lead 6s. They will still kill turkeys very, very well. But ballistically, the most advanced and effective turkey shell that's ever exists now, and it's in the tungsten small pellets, 9-shot, in 12 gauge. Usually has a 2-inch or a 2-ounce load. You can get 3.5s with a 2.5-ounce load, but I beg you to please not do that, because you don't need it. If you do decide to shoot tungsten, at least shoot a 3-inch, because it's more than enough. And it just gives you the opportunity to shoot a smaller gun with great effectiveness. I think Chris killed a turkey this morning with a 410 with some shells that I loaded, and I've killed them with a 410 too. And it doesn't earn you near the bragging rights that it used to, because you can kill them with a 410 at 40 yards. So it's not like you're having to call one to 10 or 15 yards like you would have at one point to kill them with a 410. But I could keep talking forever, but I'll let Chris cut me off and say his piece on it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think the biggest thing is with the advance of turkey shells and everything that's out there now, what it done is it allows you to cut weight and shoot smaller gauges, through Hunting and Fishing Academy's mentored youth experiences. If I get a kid that's new to hunting, I can put a 410 with a tungsten load in it and feel very good about them being lethal, at 35, 40 yards. So I think that's the biggest thing. It allows you to have less recoil and less gun to tow. But we'll take one more question and then we'll let you guys get on with your Thursday evening.
We'll probably have to take you up on the turkey loads podcast, Adam. I think that's been one of the most popular questions we get in every virtual series.
So when I will nerd out on turkey loads. I do it with Chris all the time. Anyways, he doesn't even ask about it anymore. I just do it.
That's good stuff. But the last one we have is just what advice would you give to somebody that's just getting started in turkey hunting?
Don't get discouraged because it's not supposed to be easy. It is, in my opinion, and I haven't elk hunted yet like Chris has, so he's probably got some higher class experiences than I have. But it is the greatest hunting experience that I have ever had. It's the greatest hunting sport that I know of. I duck hunt a lot. I deer hunt, not as much as Chris does, but more than most people. And I love all that stuff, but there is nothing in the world, at least not in this state, in the outdoors, I think, better than turkey hunting in the spring. But it is not supposed to be easy. It's a cliche, but it's sort of true. It's kind of the chess match that you're dealing with the turkey. I killed a few turkeys when I was 14, 15 years old with help from somebody. It was a long time before I called up and killed a turkey that I knew I did it by myself. So if you can find somebody that's experienced and knows what they're doing and is willing to put in the time to help somebody that really wants to learn, it can cut the learning curve down by a lot. But even if you don't, man, stay with it because it may take you a few years. You may hear a bunch of turkeys gobble and realize that you don't know what you're doing. But I felt like that this morning, and I've been doing it for a pretty good while. That's part of it. You're going to call some turkeys that stop at 75 yards and they don't finish. You're going to have a bunch of turkeys that leave with hens. You're going to have turkeys that are coming and everything seems perfect. And then a pack of jakes runs in or a coyote pops by, or there's so many millions of things that can happen to mess up a turkey hunt, but you don't need that many of them to go right. So if you're learning to turkey hunt, just give it the time that it takes. You know, if you're looking for a sport that you can learn in a year, and start having success all the time every year, pick a different sport. But if you want something that's going to put you in the outdoors in one of the most beautiful times of year where you can actually interact with the greatest game bird, certainly, that exists in the world, and actually interact with him. I don't mean sitting and waiting for him to come by, but you can get in there and do things with him. Turkey hunting gives you that. But there's going to be more failures than successes. Slowly, little by little, you'll get your average up into the low hundreds or 200 batting average. But if you can do that with turkeys, you're doing pretty good. And if you put the time in and spend the time with them, I think you'll learn to love the experience and love the sport as much as we do. So I hope that answered the question, but that's the only advice I can think of that's not sort of, how to, there I was kind of explanation. I think it just really does take a dedication to be willing to spend the time and learn the sport and hunt turkeys.
I agree. And I say it over and over. The spring is an amazing time in the woods. Turkeys is just what gets me out there. Don't put a lot of emphasis on harvesting a turkey. Just enjoy everything. Enjoy listening to the woods wake up in the morning and all the birds that's glad that it's warming up and all the animals and the way they're interacting. And take every day as a success, whether you get on turkeys or not. So that'll keep you going outside. I think turkeys is just an excuse to get you out there. Not to say that it's not exciting when it's hunting time, but just getting outdoors in the spring is a big piece of it. But if that's all the questions you guys have, I will tell you a little bit about some of our virtual classes we got coming up. We got several coming up in July that's starting to get around the deer and some other fishing type stuff. But just here in about 3 weeks, we got our first one on fly fishing 101. Sean Austin and the East Tennessee field rep, Jeb Beasley. They'll be discussing the species that's commonly fished for when you're fly fishing, the basic gear needs, the regulations surrounding fly fishing, and then getting you started on the places that you can begin your fly fishing journey. So thanks for tuning in. And Adam, thanks for setting in on this. And
Glad to do it, man. Anytime.
do this again. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time.